Imagine being 37,000 feet above the Earth. The world a sleeping tapestry below. The cabin is hushed. A familiar sanctuary of soft engine hums and dim lights. Then, a voice slices through the tranquility. A flight attendant's voice, trembling with an unspoken terror. Mayday! 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 The pilots are unresponsive. Is there anyone on board who knows how to fly a plane? For the 157 souls on board, this wasn't the opening scene of a movie. It was a desperate, chilling reality. What unfolded next was a fight for survival unlike any other. The only person who answered that call was a passenger from economy class, a woman who had never even set foot in a commercial cockpit, let alone flown a jet. This is the incredible, heart-stopping story of how, with the lives of everyone on board resting on her shoulders, she had to land an aircraft she was in no way qualified to fly. Global Air Flight 447 was a standard red-eye journey from the bustling East Coast to the quiet promise of the West. The plane, a modern Boeing 737, was a testament to engineering, a workhorse of the skies known for its impeccable reliability. Inside the cabin was a familiar scene of serene rest. Window shades were drawn. The ambient glow of the cabin lights cast long shadows, and the rhythmic drone of the jet engines was a gentle lullaby. In seat 17B, Tiffany Sellers was just another passenger, a 37-year-old architect on her way to a conference. She carried a hidden passion. For the last 5 years, she'd spent her weekends in the sky, a licensed private pilot whose world was defined by the simple, reliable feel of a single-engine Cessna 172. She was at home at 5,000 feet, where she navigated by landmarks and the sun. But this was an entirely different universe. A 140,000-pound commercial jetliner, flying on instruments through the dark, nearly 7 miles above the Earth, was a beast she had only ever seen from a distance. As the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, Tiffany, like the other passengers, drifted off, completely unaware of the silent, life-altering crisis about to unfold just a few dozen feet in front of her. The emergency didn't start with a jolt or a sudden noise. It began with an unnerving silence. In the cockpit, the captain and first officer, both seasoned veterans with thousands of hours in the air, had consumed the same crew meal. Unbeknownst to them, a rare, aggressive, and fast-acting foodborne toxin had silently taken hold. At first, it was just a fleeting wave of dizziness, a creeping sense of disorientation that both pilots initially dismissed as fatigue. Within minutes, however, it became debilitating. The first officer's head slumped forward onto the controls, his hands falling lifelessly from the yoke. The captain followed just seconds later. The plane's autopilot, a marvel of modern technology, remained engaged. It held the Boeing 737 in a perfect, stable flight path, humming along its pre-programmed course. For several terrifying minutes, no one was flying the plane. A senior flight attendant, accustomed to the rhythmic routine of the flight, felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The pilots had missed a routine check-in call. Following standard procedure, she used the cabin intercom to call the flight deck. There was no answer, only a dead silence. She called again, her voice a little more insistent. Still nothing. With a surge of adrenaline, she retrieved the emergency access code and pushed open the reinforced cockpit door, stepping into a nightmare she was not prepared for. Both pilots were unconscious, slumped in their seats, their faces ashen. Her extensive training immediately took over, a reflex of practiced calm under pressure. She confirmed they were unresponsive, grabbing the cabin PA microphone. Her voice, trembling with raw fear but holding steady, broadcast the unthinkable question into the sleeping cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, is there a pilot on board? We have an emergency. If there are any pilots on the aircraft, please identify yourself to the cabin crew immediately. For Tiffany Sellers in 17B, the announcement ripped her from a deep sleep. The words didn't seem real. This was the stuff of Hollywood thrillers, not a Tuesday night flight to a work conference. She looked around, expecting, desperately hoping, to see a confident, off-duty airline captain rise from a first-class seat. But no one moved. The cabin was just a sea of confused, waking faces, their disbelief mirroring her own. The flight attendant repeated the call, her voice now laced with pure panic. Tiffany's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew her private pilot's license made her vastly underqualified. She was trained to land a small, single-engine aircraft on a quiet airstrip, not a massive jet on a bustling international runway. But she also knew she was more qualified than anyone else. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. Stepping into the cockpit was like landing on another planet. The dimly lit space was a dizzying array of screens, buttons, and switches. A stark, overwhelming contrast to the simple analog gauges of her Cessna. The two pilots were exactly as the flight attendant had described, utterly still in their harnesses. A wave of dizziness and a deep sense of inadequacy washed over her. But a voice in her mind, one from her very first flight lesson, screamed a simple, foundational rule: aviate, navigate, communicate, fly the plane first. The autopilot was still on. A small, steady green light was her first glimmer of hope. It was holding their altitude and heading perfectly. It was a lifeline that bought her a moment to think. Okay, first things first, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Aviate, the plane is flying itself, for now. Her hands hovered over the controls, terrified to touch a single button that might disrupt the delicate balance. Next, navigate. Where were they? One of the large screens showed a moving map, a tiny airplane icon inching across a vast black void. They were somewhere over the Midwest, but she needed to talk to someone, anyone. She needed help. Finally, communicate. This was everything. She scanned the panels, her eyes darting over unfamiliar controls, until they found the radio headset. Her hands were slick with sweat as she fumbled to put it on. She found the push-to-talk button on the control yoke, her finger trembling as she pressed it. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," she said, her voice cracking. "This is Global Air 447. Our pilots are unconscious. I am a passenger. I have a private pilot's license, but I have no idea how to fly this airplane." For a heart-stopping second, there was only static. Then, a calm, steady voice cut through the noise, a sound of professional calm that was like an anchor in a raging storm. "Global 447, this is Kansas City Center. We read you. Your mayday is received. Ma'am, can you confirm your situation?" "Both pilots are unresponsive," she repeated, her voice a little stronger this time. "I'm in the cockpit alone. The autopilot is on. I don't know what to do." "Okay, Global 447, the controller replied, his tone deliberately measured and reassuring. "We're here to help. The first thing is not to touch anything you're not absolutely sure of. The autopilot is your friend right now. We're clearing all traffic around you. You have the sky to yourself." Over the next hour, that controller, a man named Robert, became her lifeline. He patched in a 737 rated pilot on the ground, and together, they began the slow, painstaking process of transforming a private pilot into an emergency 737 pilot. They started with the basics, identifying the primary flight display, the navigation screen, confirming her altitude, airspeed, and heading. Every instruction was simple, every step deliberate, guiding her through the terrifying maze of the cockpit. "Okay, Tiffany," Robert's voice said. "We need to start thinking about getting you on the ground. We're diverting you to Sioux Falls Regional Airport. It's got long runways, and emergency services are being scrambled right now." The gravity of the situation hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't just keeping it in the air. She had to land it. The descent was the most terrifying experience of her life. The ground pilot talked her through disengaging the altitude hold, instructing her to dial in a lower altitude. As the plane began its slow, heavy descent, the feeling was completely alien to her. Robert, the controller, guided her through the turns, giving her the exact headings that would line her up with runway 03, global 4x47. "We're going to start configuring for landing," the ground instructor pilot said. "We need to slow down. I need you to find the speed brake lever." After he described its location and appearance, Tiffany found it, her hand shaking as she wrapped her fingers around the handle. "Okay, gently pull it back. You'll feel a slight buffet. That's normal." Next came the flaps, the huge panels on the wings that allow a plane to fly at a slower, safer speed. "To your right, there's a lever with notches," the instructor explained. "Move it to the first notch. Flaps 1. She did it, and the plane's handling changed, the airframe groaning with the shift. They repeated the process, step by agonizing step. Flaps 5, then flaps 15. "Okay, Tiffany, time for the landing gear," Robert said, his voice a steady, calming presence. "The handle should look like a small tire. Pull it out and move it down." She found the lever and yanked it. 3 loud, reassuring thuds echoed through the cockpit, and 3 green lights lit up on the panel. The gear was down. Through the cockpit window, the lights of Sioux Falls appeared, a welcoming grid in the vast darkness. But the runway, with its strings of white lights, looked impossibly small and far away. "You're getting high," the instructor warned. "Nose down slightly. Keep your speed right at 140 knots. On the final approach, the moment she dreaded most arrived. The autopilot had to be turned off. This was it. Everything was on her. Her hands gripped the control yoke, her knuckles white. "Okay, disconnecting autopilot," she announced, her heart in her throat. The plane felt incredibly heavy, a lumbering beast compared to her nimble Cessna. "You're doing great," Robert coached, his voice unwavering. "Just keep the end of the runway centered, in your window. Small corrections. Small, gentle corrections." The plane's automated voice began calling out the altitude in a synthesized calm. 500, 100, 50, 40, 30. "Okay, Tiffany, start to flare," the instructor commanded. "Gently pull back on the yoke. Just a little. Let it settle." She pulled back, her muscles screaming with the effort of control. The nose lifted slightly. She held her breath as the main wheels hit the tarmac, with a loud screech and a jolt. It wasn't a perfect landing, but it was solid. The nose wheel came down a little hard, and the plane swerved left. "Right rudder!" Robert shouted instantly. She stomped on the right rudder pedal, just like she'd practiced 1,000 times in her Cessna. The plane straightened out. She pulled the throttles back to idle and hit the reverse thrusters, just as they had instructed. The roar was deafening as the massive jet finally began to roll to a stop. For a long, surreal moment, there was only silence. The roar of the engine spooled down, replaced by the sound of her own ragged, triumphant breathing. Then, the radio crackled to life. It wasn't an instruction. It was the sound of dozens of people cheering in the control tower. "Incredible job, Global 447," Robert said. his professional calm finally breaking as his voice filled with emotion. Absolutely incredible. Emergency services are on their way. Fire trucks and ambulances swarmed the plane, their lights a festive, swirling beacon in the dark. They weren't there to put out a fire, but to welcome a miracle. The passengers, who had been sitting in terrified silence for the duration of the descent, erupted into a wave of applause and relieved shouts. Tiffany Sellers, an architect and weekend pilot, slumped back in the captain's chair. Completely spent, she had done the impossible. The two pilots were rushed to the hospital and made full recoveries. The incident was investigated, and the combination of Tiffany's calm approach and the flawless teamwork from air traffic control became a case study in crisis management. She never saw herself as a hero, just as someone who did what had to be done. But for the 157 people whose lives she saved, she was everything. It just goes to show, you never know where courage will come from, or who will step up when everything is on the line.